It was the year of 2005, and we would finally see how the origin story of Darth Vader would wrap up with the release of Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith. And much like the prior two films, which had video game tie-ins of their own, Revenge of the Sith also had its own video game. Two separate versions being the console versions by LucasArts and The Collective, which follows a formula not unlike EA's Lord of the Rings adaptations, the other being a handheld game developed by Ubisoft under LucasArts license. How does it fare? Let's find out. If you have seen the Revenge of the Sith film, you probably already know the plot. Anakin and Obi-Wan start off on the search for Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, being held hostage by Count Dooku and General Grievous. Anakin and Obi-Wan then duel with the fallen Jedi and escape the crumbling ship, while Grievous escapes in another ship to a Confederacy-controlled base on the planet Utapau. Eventually, Obi-Wan and Anakin go their separate ways. The Jedi Master would try and continue his fight to preserve the peace walking the light, while his apprentice would make his final steps towards the dark side. As the story turns out to be the best the prequels have to offer, the game does a pretty fine job in adapting from the movie and even adding some new sequences that does not feel out of place, such as a lightsaber duel with a then new character named Sin Drawling. As for the gameplay, while the console version is a 3D arcade-style action game, again like EA's Lord of the Rings titles, the handheld versions are instead a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up akin to games such as Capcom's Final Fight or Sega's Streets of Rage. But instead of fists and weapons to pick up, you are a Jedi, so you rely on skills with your lightsaber and the Force. Also, the story also splits into the two following branches, Obi-Wan in the light to Anakin in the dark. The gameplay itself is a simple two-face button plus shoulder button combat system, bearing in mind that the DS version is ported from the Game Boy Advance, but with an addition of very minor touchscreen controls, which help you do special moves if you don't want to press more buttons. Basically a prerequisite of when 3DS fighting games would allow for similar, such as Street Fighter 4 or even Dead or Alive. Besides that, the DS version of the game contains an exclusive gameplay mode in where you get to pilot the Jedi Starfighter in 3D. More precisely, the ETA-2 Light Interceptor, and the gameplay of that is very similar to the classic Rogue Squadron games. It is also the only mode to feature multiplayer, which I sadly cannot show due to not having multiple DS cards to get a sibling or two to play with. Honestly, looking at this mode in particular, while I think it's a nice addition, I don't think it makes the game incomplete by not having it. Not to mention, it hasn't aged that well, considering the D-pad, which was one of the only regular control inputs on the DS, was used at the time. Granted, on the 3DS and its variants, it feels a little better, but not by a whole lot, as the circle pad is basically a cloned D-pad for regular DS games. But the main game, however, is a pretty well done beat-em-up in the Star Wars universe, and with the cool art style that kind of remind me of a lot of Star Wars comics. Not to mention, sounds great too, as the DS cartridge allows for nearly CD quality audio, as you can hear the John Williams soundtrack damn near uncompromised, while a different sound font was used on the GBA cartridge, again, limitations and all. But overall, Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith on the Nintendo DS deserves a 7 out of 10. During Christmas of 2020, I reviewed the Ubisoft version of Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith on Nintendo DS. Now, I want to talk about the more popular version of the game, developed by The Collective and published by LucasArts, released only on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Though there is no standalone GameCube release, but with either a Game Boy player for Ubisoft's GBA release, or hell, wait a few months after and the first LEGO Star Wars game would be ported, it's not like fans of Nintendo's cubic hardware were exactly missing out for an interactive Revenge of the Sith experience. But anyway, how does the most highly promoted adaptation of the final prequel film hold? Let's find out. Like with the handheld version, if you've already seen the Revenge of the Sith movie, you pretty much know the plot, in that it follows the final steps of Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side, transforming into Darth Vader. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan continues his hard path of the light side, witnessing the fall of his Jedi brethren, and the way it's told is about as you would expect from movie tie-in games, in using movie footage to set up the scene before the game shifts to its visuals in the engine. Nothing more, nothing less. Though some of the liberties it takes doesn't hit with me.
mainly with the absence of Padme Amidala. Yet the GBA and DS version, hell, even the LEGO game didn't seem to forget. Well, except for one scene. Anyway, moving on to the gameplay. While the handheld version is a 2D beat/hack-em-up in vein of Sega's Streets of Rage or Capcom's Final Fight, the console version is a 3D beat/hack-em-up in vein of another set of movie license games, being based on Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. But instead of being set in medieval fantasy, we have a galaxy far, far away. In the game, you'll not only learn mastery of the lightsaber, you'll also learn mastery of the Force, taking your skills on droids, clone troopers, and even rival Jedi and Sith. With techniques that have been used in Star Wars games prior, from light side techniques like healing to dark side powers like lightning. And it plays pretty decently, though I wouldn't call it the ultimate Jedi action experience, as it was hyped when past action games in the Star Wars saga have done it better. Unlike The Lord of the Rings, where you can, for the most part, select different characters, especially after you beat a game, you sadly don't have that sort of freedom in Revenge of the Sith, as each level will decide for you on playing Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader, or Obi-Wan Kenobi. Personally, I like how the DS version did it better, in that they give each of the Jedi their own path, rather than just choosing another character for the following level. One of the things of major note, though, is that unlike the GBA and DS version, there is an alternate ending to the game, in where you play as the final level as Anakin. He kills not just one, but both of his masters, ruling the galaxy with his own iron fist, which is kinda cool to see and makes you think of what could happen next. But besides the single player, the PS2 and Xbox version of the game also allow for unlockable bonus missions, some being single player, others being a rather limited co-op mode that can be played with bots. In addition, there is also a versus multiplayer mode where various Jedi and Sith can duke it out in a fighting game-like setting, serving as a prerequisite to what the Wii versions of both Force Unleashed games have provided later on. That too can be played with bots, but sadly, not enough is done with it, besides wanting to duel with a bot or friends. No arcade ladder, nothing. Now onto the graphics, and sad to say, the character models have shown their age even by 2005, but the environments look pretty decent, replicating the source material pretty well. But besides that, it's pretty rough. The soundtrack is about what you'd expect from a Star Wars game, involving the sound from Skywalker Sound, as well as music from the great John Williams, and in addition, from Mark Griskey, as it has reused tracks from Obsidian's own Knights of the Old Republic 2, The Sith Lords. So while they aren't tracks from the film itself, what's chosen works here too. Overall, Revenge of the Sith on the PlayStation 2 and Xbox is by all leagues a decent game, and a fun way to play through the film it was based on. Though most of the fun comes from the single-player campaign, which might be short in and of itself, but has some decent replay value. But if you wanted some multiplayer action, the LEGO games are a bit better on that front. Otherwise, check this game out. So, as you saw by my two videos, I have given both renditions of the game adaptation of Revenge of the Sith a 7 out of 10. But despite my scoring, I do have a preference, and in this extension of those reviews, I want to talk about what and why in 3 categories. For my first round, let's start with the visuals, and despite the fact that the PlayStation 2 and Xbox version try to emulate the film, as I said, they haven't aged too well, mainly with the character models, though the environments look great. Meanwhile, the comic book-like art style of the Ubisoft version on the DS looks fantastic to this day, even on the 2DS, as that is the only version of the 3DS I have as of this writing. And for that, round 1 goes to the Ubisoft version. For my second round, I'm going to cover the extra content, and this is where I think the Ubisoft version falters, as the multiplayer is hidden behind buying another copy of the game on both the GBA and DS version. And given the DS version's multiplayer is just dogfighting, which itself is not great, more on that in the next category, I can't say I'm missing much. Meanwhile, the multiplayer is accessible in the single player in the collective version. And to be fair, it's still kind of a letdown in its own right, as there is hardly a reason to replay them in contrast to the single player missions, just as with the standard bonus missions. But one thing about Collective's version, will always stand out to me the most, and that is the what if ending, in where Anakin offs both Obi-Wan and Palpatine, usurping so much power in the process. This pains me to say as a Nintendo fan, but the PS2 and Xbox versions win this one. But the finale here is the gameplay, and I think they are both good at what they do, be it in 3D or 2D. But I think I might have a fondness for beat-em-ups like Streets of Rage and Final Fight. Hell, I grew up with Spider-Man and Venom Maximum Carnage on the Super Nintendo before I played the prior mentioned games. And there's just some charm with this genre in being a Jedi. But the only thing that does suck is the 3D Starfighter levels, as the limitations of the DS really show with these, as these were built for a D-pad. And as a result, the PlayStation 2 and Xbox versions are a bit more consistent. Still, I can't give Collective's version the win here, as there have been better Jedi-themed action games in the Star Wars saga, even prior to its release. The overall winner, the Ubisoft version of Revenge of the Sith, is my favorite version of the game, and one I would recommend the most if you had to pick one. But that said, check both out if you can, they are worth it.